My own son called me trash, after I'd cleaned toilets for years to fund his fancy law degree. He thought I was powerless, someone he could just cast aside. He didn't count on his biggest rival delighting in the chance to help this old trash serve up some cold, hard legal justice that would cost him dearly. Before I begin my story, let me know in the comments where you are listening from and what time it is. I just want to know I'm not alone in this. And if you feel moved by what you hear, consider subscribing. It helps more people become aware of the reality of elder abuse. Now let me tell you what really happened. My name is Hazel Bishop, and for the better part of my 61 years, my hands have known the sting of bleach and the rough caress of industrial-strength cleaning rags more intimately than they've known a lady's lotion. They are gnarled now, the knuckles swollen like old tree roots, the skin perpetually dry despite my best efforts. These hands, they tell the story of my life, a life poured out like a libation for one singular, shining purpose. My son Jerome. Jerome's father, my sweet Samuel, was taken from us by a fever when Jerome was just a boy of 5. Samuel had been a dreamer, a kind man with a laugh that could fill a room, but not one for saving or planning. He left me with a mountain of love, a mountain of grief, and precious little else. I looked at my small, bright-eyed Jerome, his future stretching before him like an uncharted map, and I made a vow. He would not be defined by our poverty. He would have chances I never did. He would soar. And so I scrubbed. I scrubbed toilets in the dead of night in cavernous, empty office buildings, the silence broken only by the hum of the fluorescent lights and the rhythmic swish of my mop. I polished floors until they gleamed like dark mirrors, my reflection a tired, hunched figure I barely recognized. I emptied overflowing bins, wiped away the careless spills of people who would never know my name, people whose lives were a galaxy away from my own. I took on extra shifts cleaning at the bus station, the stench of diesel and despair clinging to my clothes. Also, Jerome could have the best textbooks, the neatest school uniforms, the after-school tutoring that would give him an edge. He was a smart boy, my Jerome. Quick-witted, with a sharp tongue even then. He did well in school, and my heart swelled with a fierce, protective pride. Every A on his report card, every accolade felt like a personal victory, a justification for my aching back, my raw hands, my perpetually weary soul. The other mothers at the school gates, with their neat coats and polite inquiries about my little cleaning business, never knew the half of it. They never knew the bone-deep exhaustion, the gnawing fear of not making rent, the constant, quiet sacrifices. When he got into city law school, a prestigious institution far beyond anything I could have imagined for myself, I wept for a solid hour. Tears of joy, of relief, of a profound, almost unbearable gratitude. This was it. This was what all those years of toil had been for. My son, Jerome Bishop, was going to be a lawyer, a man of importance, a man who could command respect. The tuition fees were astronomical, a figure that made my head spin. But I didn't flinch. I took on more work. I sold the few pieces of decent jewelry Samuel had left me. I ate less, slept less, pushed my aging body to its absolute limits. My small apartment grew shabbier, my own needs shrinking to almost nothing. Every spare penny, every ounce of my energy, was funneled into Jerome's success. He needed a new suit for his moot court competitions. I found the money. He needed extra for networking dinners with influential professors. I worked an extra weekend shift. He was good about calling in those early years of law school, his voice full of excitement about his classes, his triumphs, the brilliant future that lay before him. He'd sometimes thank me, a quick, "Couldn't do it without you, Mom," before launching into his latest academic conquest. Those small acknowledgments were like fuel to my weary engine. But as graduation approached, as he began interviewing with high-powered city firms, a subtle shift occurred. His calls became less frequent. When he did visit, his eyes would skim over my worn furniture, my simple clothes, with a new, appraising look I couldn't quite decipher, but that made me feel vaguely inadequate. He started talking about image, about the right connections, about the world he was about to enter, a world so far removed from the scent of bleach and floor polish that defined mine. The day he graduated, magna cum laude, I was there, hidden in the back row of the grand auditorium, my best and only church dress feeling hopelessly out of place amidst the designer suits and silk scarves of the other parents. My cough, a persistent rattling thing that had settled in my chest over the last few harsh winters, chose that moment to act up, and I saw Jerome on stage glance briefly in my direction with a flicker of what looked like annoyance. Or was it shame? I quickly stifled the cough, my heart sinking. He landed a coveted position at Rourke, Sterling and Finch, one of the city's most prestigious law firms. Clayton Rourke, one of the senior partners, was a name Jerome often mentioned with a mixture of awe and a strange competitive resentment. "He's brilliant, Mom, but so arrogant," Jerome would say. "Thinks he knows everything." Now at 28, Jerome Bishop Esquire was launched. My sacrifices, I told myself, had paid off. He was a success. My work was done. I could finally, perhaps, ease up a little, maybe even ask him for a bit of help now that he was earning a lawyer's salary. My landlord was raising the rent again, and my old back was screaming a louder protest each morning. Surely my son, the brilliant lawyer I had made, would understand. Surely he would remember the years of scrubbed toilets that had paved his path to that gleaming office downtown. The thought, however, carried with it a new, unfamiliar tremor of apprehension. The boy whose future I had built with my own raw hands was now a man of a different world, and I wasn't entirely sure if his mother, Hazel Bishop the cleaner, still had a place in it. The rent increase notice felt like a lead weight in my already overburdened hands. Another $50 a month. It might as well have been $500. My old back, a constant screaming testament to decades spent hunched over mops and buckets, was making it harder and harder to take on those extra cleaning shifts at the downtown office buildings, the ones that paid a little better but left me a trembling, exhausted wreck by morning. My small disability check barely covered the essentials. For years I told myself that once Jerome was through law school, once he was established, I could finally ease up, perhaps even ask him for a little help. That time, I realized with a sinking heart, had arrived not as a gentle reprieve, but as a stark, looming necessity. It took me a week to gather the courage to call him. A week of sleepless nights, of replaying his dismissive glance at my worn church dress during his graduation, of his increasingly infrequent perfunctory phone calls. He was Jerome Bishop Esquire, now an associate at the prestigious firm of Rourke, Sterling and Finch. He was busy. He was important. And I was just Mom the cleaner, the woman whose hands still smelled faintly of bleach no matter how hard I scrubbed. Finally, on a Tuesday morning after a particularly bad night where my back had seized up completely, leaving me gasping for breath on the cold linoleum floor of my tiny kitchen, I dialed his direct line at the firm, a number he'd given me with a certain proud flourish weeks ago. Jerome Bishop's office, a crisp, professional voice answered. His secretary. "May I speak to Mr. Bishop, please?" I asked, my own voice sounding small and reedy. "It's his mother, Hazel Bishop." There was a slight pause, a subtle shift in the secretary's tone. "One moment, please." I waited, the receiver growing slippery in my sweating palm. Then Jerome's voice, no longer the warm, excited tone of his law school days, but cool, impatient, a voice I barely recognized. "Mom, is everything all right? I'm in the middle of a very important brief." "Jerome, dear," I began, my heart thumping. I wouldn't bother you if it wasn't important. It's just my landlord, he's raised the rent again. And my back, it's been giving me terrible trouble. I was wondering, now that you're doing so well, if perhaps you could lend me a little something? Just until I can find some lighter work." I also wanted to ask if he could glance over a confusing notice I'd received about my late husband Samuel's tiny, almost forgotten veterans benefit, something a lawyer might understand. Another pause, longer this time. I could hear the faint click of a keyboard in the background. "Mom," he said finally, his voice even colder now, "we've talked about this. I'm just starting out. My expenses are astronomical. I have an image to maintain, appearances to keep up. I can't just be handing out cash." "It's not handing out cash, Jerome," I said, a tremor of hurt in my voice. It's your mother asking for a little help after all these years." I didn't say after all my sacrifices, but the words hung heavy in the air between us. He sighed, a sound of pure, unadulterated exasperation. "Look, I really don't have time for this right now. Can you meet me for coffee? Downstairs lobby. 15 minutes. That's all I can spare." He hung up before I could even reply. His office building was a gleaming monolith of steel and glass, a world away from the gritty streets I traversed for my cleaning jobs. I felt small and out of place in my best and only good coat, my worn handbag clutched in my gnarled hands. The lobby was vast, echoing, filled with sharp-suited men and women who moved with an air of effortless importance. Jerome was waiting by the entrance to the sleek minimalist coffee bar, tapping his expensive shoe impatiently, his gaze flicking over me with a look that made me want to shrink. He didn't offer me a seat, didn't ask if I wanted a coffee. He just stood there, his arms crossed, his expression a mixture of annoyance and embarrassment. "Okay, Mom," he said, his voice low, urgent. "What is it? Make it quick. I have a meeting with Mr. Rourke in half an hour." Clayton Rourke. The senior partner he both admired and resented. I took a deep breath, trying to steady my nerves. "Jerome, it's like I said. The rent in my back. I was hoping you could see your way to helping me out just a little. And there was this letter about your father's old benefits." He cut me off with a sharp, dismissive wave of his hand. "Help you?" he sneered, his voice dripping with a contempt that struck me like a physical blow. "Mother, look at you." His eyes raked over me, from my sensible worn shoes to my carefully mended coat, lingering for a moment on my hands, the hands that had scrubbed toilets for him. "You still smell like bleach and toilet cleaner. Do you have any idea the kind of people I associate with now? The kind of image I have to project?" My face burned. I could feel the curious glances of a few people nearby. "You're an embarrassment, Mother," he continued, his voice a venomous whisper now. "Trash. From a life I've worked hard to escape. That's what you are. Trash." He called me trash. Me, his mother. The woman who had gone without so he could have, who had broken her body so he could build his future. The pain was so intense, so unexpected, it stole my breath. I tried to speak, to defend myself, to remind him of the years of my sacrifice, but the words wouldn't come. I could only stare at him, my heart shattering into a million pieces. He saw my tears, my devastation, and it seemed to fuel his cruelty. "Oh, please," he scoffed, rolling his eyes. "Don't lay that martyrdom trip on me. You did what you had to do. That doesn't mean I owe you a damn thing for those filthy jobs you worked. I got this degree, this position through my hard work, my intellect, not yours." He reached into his pocket, pulled out a crisp $20 bill and thrust it at me. "Here," he said, his lip curled in a sneer. "Go buy yourself some decent soap. And don't bother me again with your petty problems. I have a real life now." With that, he turned on his heel and strode towards the elevators, leaving me standing there, the $20 bill clutched in my trembling hand, the echo of his vile words, trash, filthy jobs, petty problems, ringing in my ears. My son. My Jerome. The brilliant lawyer I had made. I don't know how long I stood there, frozen in a tableau of public humiliation and private agony. Eventually, a kindly security guard, noticing my distress, gently asked if I was all right. I couldn't speak. I just nodded, turned, and stumbled out of that gleaming, heartless building, back into the gritty reality of the city streets, the city I had cleaned for him. The $20 bill felt like a brand in my palm. Trash. He thought I was trash. After everything. The sacrifices, the endless nights of toil, the dreams I had poured into him, all reduced to that single ugly word. That night, alone in my small, cold apartment, the pain didn't lessen. It transformed. It hardened. It became a cold, steely fury, a resolve I hadn't known I possessed. He had called my contributions filthy jobs. He had called me trash. He thought he owed me nothing. He was about to learn the true cost of a mother's love, and the even steeper price of a mother's scorn. The $20 bill Jerome had thrust at me lay crumpled on my small kitchen table, a stark, insulting monument to his cruelty. "Go buy yourself some decent soap," he'd sneered, his words echoing the clatter of his expensive shoes as he'd strode away, leaving me shattered in the opulent lobby of his law firm. Trash. That's what he'd called me. His mother, who had scrubbed the city's grime from other people's lives so he could inhabit that gleaming world of power and prestige, was now just trash to him, an embarrassment to be discarded. Sleep that night was an impossibility. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw his face twisted with contempt, heard his voice dripping with disdain. The physical ache in my back, a constant companion from years of relentless labor, was nothing compared to the searing agony in my soul. He had not just refused my plea for help. He had systematically dismantled my worth, my sacrifices, my very identity as his mother, all in the space of 15 brutal minutes. He had taken my love, the purest, most unconditional thing I had to give, and spat it back in my face. But as the bleak pre-dawn light began to seep through my thin curtains, something shifted within me. The initial shock, the profound, immobilizing grief of his betrayal, began to recede, replaced by a different kind of fire. It wasn't the hot, explosive rage of his own temper tantrums. It was a cold, deep, simmering fury, the kind that burns slow and long, forging resolve in its unforgiving heat. He thought I was trash? He thought I was a martyr with petty problems? He thought he owed me nothing for the filthy jobs I'd worked, the jobs that had paid for his polished shoes, his expensive education, his arrogant sense of superiority? He was about to learn a lesson no law school could ever teach him. The lesson of consequences delivered by the very woman he had so callously dismissed. My mind, usually so weary by day's end, began to work with a sharp, almost painful clarity. He was a lawyer now, wasn't he? Proud of his intellect, his ability to argue, to win. He respected power, position. He clearly had no respect for me, for my sacrifices. So, I would have to speak to him in a language he understood. But how? I had no money for a lawyer of my own. The $20 on the table wouldn't even cover a consultation with the kind of legal sharks he now swam with. My social circle consisted of other tired, hard-working women from my cleaning jobs, and Mrs. Rodriguez from next door, kind but with no influence. I had no power, no connections in his new, glittering world. Or did I? A memory surfaced, a snippet of conversation from one of Jerome's rare visits a few months back, when he was still occasionally trying to impress me with tales of his burgeoning career. He'd been complaining, with a mixture of youthful arrogance and grudging respect, about one of the senior partners at his firm, Rourke, Sterling and Finch. Clayton Rourke, Jerome had said, swirling the cheap wine I'd offered him as if it were a vintage Bordeaux. The man's a legend, a courtroom gladiator. Thinks he walks on water. He's brilliant, I'll give him that, but so damn sure of himself. We had a difference of opinion on the Henderson case last week. He actually listened to my input, can you believe it? But he's my main rival for making junior partner next year, I swear. He's always watching, always looking for an angle. Clayton Rourke. A rival. Someone Jerome both admired and resented. Someone who, according to Jerome, was always looking for an angle. An idea, audacious and terrifying, began to form in my mind. What if I gave Mr. Rourke an angle? What if the trash mother, the woman who smelled of bleach and toilet cleaner, had a story that might interest a courtroom gladiator, especially one who was Jerome's professional competitor? The thought was so bold it made my heart pound. Could I do it? Could I walk into that same gleaming monolith of a building, not as a supplicant begging for crumbs from my son, but as a potential client, a woman with a grievance? Could I expose my own son's cruelty, his profound ingratitude to one of his own colleagues, his own rivals? The shame of it, the sheer, unthinkably painful prospect of airing my family's dirtiest laundry in such a public professional forum, was immense. But then I remembered Jerome's sneer, the $20 bill, the word trash. And my resolve hardened. He had left me no dignity to preserve. He had already dragged our family through the mud with his own vile behavior. I spent the next few days meticulously gathering what little proof I had. It wasn't much. Bank withdrawal slips from years past, showing money transferred for Jerome's tuition. Faded receipts for expensive law textbooks. My own worn-out account books from my cleaning jobs, showing every penny earned, every penny spent, the vast majority of it on him. I even found a few old birthday cards he'd written me as a boy, full of childish promises to look after you when I'm a rich lawyer, Mommy. The irony was a bitter pill. This wasn't about suing him for the money, not really. How could I quantify a lifetime of sacrifice in dollars and cents? No, this was about something more. This was about justice, yes, but it was also about reclaiming my own narrative, my own worth. He had called me stupid, an embarrassment. I would show him the strength he had so foolishly underestimated. The decision to approach Clayton Rourke was the most difficult I had ever made. Harder even than the decision to sell Samuel's few remaining tools to pay for Jerome's bar exam fees. It felt like a betrayal of the very idea of motherhood. But Jerome had betrayed that first, and far more brutally. On Friday morning I put on my best and only good coat again. I didn't try to scrub the scent of bleach from my hands. Let Mr. Rourke smell the reality of the filthy jobs that had made his associate Jerome Bishop Esquire. I took a deep breath, picked up my worn handbag containing my meager evidence and my even more meager courage, and headed back downtown. This time I wasn't going to the coffee bar in the lobby. This time I was going to the top floor. This time Hazel Bishop was going to see a lawyer about her son. The elevator that whisked me to the 40th floor of the Rourke, Sterling and Finch building felt like a transparent cage ascending into a realm I had no business entering. My worn handbag, containing my carefully compiled folder of faded receipts, old bank slips, and Jerome's childishly scrawled birthday cards promising future care, felt pitifully inadequate against the backdrop of gleaming marble and hushed, expensive efficiency. The scent of bleach from my morning's work still clung faintly to my best and only good coat, a stark contrast to the subtle, expensive colognes that seemed to perfume the very air of this place. Jerome worked here. Jerome, who had called me trash. The receptionist, a young woman with a headset and a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes, looked up as I approached her imposing mahogany desk. "Can I help you?" she asked, her tone polite but with an underlying note of professional gatekeeping. I'd like to see Mr. Clayton Rourke," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "I don't have an appointment, but it's a rather urgent personal matter." Her perfectly sculpted eyebrows rose a fraction. "Mr. Rourke is an extremely busy man, madam. He generally doesn't see anyone without a prior arrangement. Is this regarding an existing case?" "No," I said, clutching my handbag tighter. It's about one of his associates. Mr. Jerome Bishop." At the mention of Jerome's name, a flicker of something, curiosity, recognition, crossed her face before the professional mask slipped back into place. "I see. And your name?" "Hazel Bishop," I replied. "I'm his mother." That definitely got a reaction. A longer pause this time. Her eyes did a quick, subtle scan of my appearance, from my sensible shoes to my slightly frayed coat collar. I could almost hear the unspoken judgment. This was Jerome Bishop's mother? The sharp, ambitious young lawyer who was already making a name for himself? "Please take a seat, Mrs. Bishop," she said, her voice a shade cooler now. "I'll see if Mr. Rourke is available to speak with you briefly." I sat on the edge of a plush leather sofa that probably cost more than my entire year's earnings, feeling like a sparrow that had accidentally flown into an eagle's eyrie. The silence was broken only by the muted clicks of keyboards and the distant hum of the city. Every person who walked by, impeccably dressed, exuding an air of effortless confidence, made me feel smaller, more out of place. What was I doing here? This was madness. Jerome was right, I was an embarrassment. Just as I was about to lose my nerve and flee, the receptionist beckoned. "Mrs. Bishop? Mr. Rourke will see you for a few minutes. His office is down the hall, last door on the right." My heart hammered against my ribs. This was it. Clayton Rourke's office was vast, with a panoramic view of the city that made my small apartment feel like a shoebox. Books lined one entire wall, not just law tomes but history, philosophy, even a few volumes of poetry. He stood as I entered, a tall, imposing man in his late 30s, his suit impeccably tailored, his dark hair shot with a surprising touch of silver at the temples. He wasn't smiling, but his eyes, sharp and intelligent, held a neutral, assessing gaze. He gestured to a chair opposite his large, uncluttered desk. "Mrs. Bishop," he said, his voice a deep baritone. "Thank you for waiting. My secretary tells me you wish to speak with me regarding my associate, Jerome Bishop. Please sit." I sat, perching on the edge of the chair, my handbag on my lap. He didn't offer coffee, didn't engage in small talk. He just waited, his gaze steady. "Mr. Rourke," I began, my voice trembling slightly despite my resolve. I am Jerome Bishop's mother. And I am here because my son has treated me in a way that I can no longer endure in silence. He told me you were a man who understood angles, a man who wasn't afraid of a fight." A flicker of something, amusement, intrigue, crossed his face. "Jerome said that, did he? Interesting." He leaned back slightly. "Please, Mrs. Bishop, tell me your story." And so I did. I told him everything. I told him about Samuel, my late husband, and our dreams for Jerome. I told him about the decades I spent scrubbing toilets, cleaning offices, the back-breaking labor, the endless sacrifices to fund Jerome's education, his law school, his bar exam, even the deposit on his fancy new apartment. I pulled out my worn ledger, my faded receipts, the bank slips showing years of transfers to Jerome's account, always marked "for your future, son." I showed him the childish birthday cards with their scrawled promises. "When I'm a rich lawyer, Mommy, I'll buy you a big house." Then, my voice cracking, I told him about Jerome's graduation, his new job, his growing arrogance, his shame of me. I recounted the scene in the lobby of this very building, his cruel words. "You smell like bleach and toilet cleaner, you're an embarrassment, mother trash." The $20 bill thrust at me like an insult. I told him of my desperate plea for a small loan, my fear of eviction, and his utter callous refusal. Throughout my story, Clayton Rourke remained silent, his gaze fixed on me, his expression unreadable. He didn't interrupt, didn't offer platitudes. He just listened, his focus absolute. When I finally finished, my voice hoarse, my eyes stinging with unshed tears, there was a long pause. He picked up one of the old bank slips, then a birthday card. He looked from them to me. "Mrs. Bishop," he said finally, his voice surprisingly gentle. "You have endured a great deal. Your sacrifices for your son are extraordinary." And his response, if what you say is accurate, is not just ungrateful. It is reprehensible. "It is accurate, Mr. Rourke," I said quietly. "Every word." He nodded slowly. "Jerome Bishop is a talented young lawyer. Ambitious. Driven. Perhaps," he added, a wry twist to his lips, "a little too convinced of his own brilliance already." "He sees me as a rival, you say?" "He does," I confirmed. Clayton Rourke stood and walked to the window, looking out over the city skyline for a moment. Then he turned back to me. "Mrs. Bishop, from a strictly legal standpoint, recouping funds given over many years without a formal loan agreement can be challenging. Filial responsibility, while a moral imperative, is not always a legally enforceable contract for past support, especially once a child is an adult." My heart sank. Of course. I was a fool to have come here. "However," he continued, and my head snapped up, "the circumstances you describe, your son's current professional standing achieved directly through your documented, extreme financial sacrifice, followed by his complete and cruel repudiation of you when you are in genuine need, and his demeaning, slanderous remarks about you, that presents a rather unique and, shall we say, compelling narrative." He returned to his desk, his eyes now holding a distinct glint, the look of a courtroom gladiator who has just scented blood, or perhaps, a profound injustice he felt compelled to address. "What Jerome did to you, Mrs. Bishop, particularly his public remarks, could potentially constitute defamation, designed to harm your reputation however humble you believe it to be. His refusal to offer even minimal support after benefiting so extensively from your sacrifices, while perhaps not illegal in itself, paints a picture of profound unjust enrichment and moral turpitude that any judge, any jury, any colleague," he added with emphasis, "would find distasteful, to say the least." He looked directly at me. "I find Jerome Bishop's arrogance and lack of character problematic. And I confess, the opportunity to teach a young upstart a lesson in humility, especially one who works for this firm and clearly needs it, is not without its professional appeal. More importantly, Mrs. Bishop, your story has moved me. No mother deserves such treatment." He leaned forward. "I will take your case, Mrs. Bishop. Pro bono for now. We will draft a letter to Jerome, outlining your grievances and demanding immediate, substantial, and ongoing financial support, as well as a formal public apology for his remarks. We will detail the sacrifices you made, the funds you provided. We will make it very clear that his current professional standing is built upon your filthy jobs. And we will let him know that if a satisfactory arrangement is not met swiftly, we are prepared to explore all legal avenues, including a civil suit for restitution and damages, which I assure you, would be exceptionally embarrassing for a young lawyer at Rourke, Sterling and Finch." A wave of disbelief, then overwhelming gratitude, washed over me. This powerful man, Jerome's rival, was going to help me. Me, Hazel Bishop the cleaner. "Mr. Rourke," I whispered, my voice choked with emotion, I don't know what to say." "Say nothing yet, Mrs. Bishop," he said, a rare, almost predatory smile touching his lips. "Let's see what Jerome has to say first when he receives my letter. I suspect his important brief might suddenly seem rather less pressing." He stood, extending his hand. "We will be in touch very soon." As I walked out of his office, out of that gleaming tower of power, my steps felt lighter than they had in years. The $20 bill was still crumpled in my pocket. But now it felt less like a symbol of my humiliation, and more like the first tiny down payment on the justice that was finally about to be served. The week after my meeting with Clayton Rourke was a torment of anxious anticipation. Every ring of my old telephone, Every official-looking envelope that dropped through my mail slot sent my heart leaping into my throat. Had Jerome received the letter? What would he do? Would his arrogance crumble, or would his cruelty find new, more vicious expressions? I continued my cleaning shifts, my body moving on autopilot, scrubbing floors and polishing chrome, while my mind replayed every detail of my conversation with Mr. Rourke, clinging to his confident assertion that Jerome's important brief might suddenly seem rather less pressing. The $20 bill Jerome had flung at me still lay on my kitchen table, a constant bitter reminder. I hadn't touched it. It was a symbol of his contempt, and I vowed it would be the last charity I ever accepted from him. It was on a Thursday, nearly 10 days after my visit to Rourke, Sterling and Finch, that the first tremor of the impending earthquake reached me. Mr. Rourke himself called. "Mrs. Bishop," his deep baritone voice was calm, almost casual. "I trust you are well. I wanted to inform you that my letter was delivered to Mr. Jerome Bishop at the office yesterday afternoon. By registered mail, signature required. He signed for it himself." "And?" I asked, my breath catching. Has he responded?" A dry chuckle came down the line. "Not directly to me, no. But my sources within the firm, and one does cultivate sources, Mrs. Bishop, indicate that Mr. Bishop had a rather animated reaction. Apparently, his usual composure deserted him quite spectacularly. There was shouting. A rather expensive paperweight may have met an untimely end against his office wall. And he abruptly cancelled all his afternoon appointments, including a rather crucial preliminary hearing he was scheduled to attend. A small, grim smile touched my lips. So the first volley had landed. Animated. I repeated. "Indeed," Mr. Rourke confirmed. He then, I am told, spent a considerable amount of time on the phone with his own legal counsel, a rather aggressive litigator from a rival firm. "It seems your son is preparing for a fight, Mrs. Bishop, rather than a sensible discussion or an apology." "I expected as much, Mr. Rourke," I said, a weary sigh escaping me. "Jerome does not back down easily, especially when his pride is wounded. Or his wallet threatened," I added silently. "Precisely," Mr. Rourke said. "Which is why we will not be waiting for his satisfactory arrangement. As per our discussion, my team has prepared the initial filings for a civil suit. We will be seeking restitution for the financial support you provided for his education and establishment, citing unjust enrichment and moral obligation, and we will also include a claim for damages due to defamation and intentional infliction of emotional distress based on his public remarks and subsequent treatment of you." He paused. "We can file as early as Monday. Are you still resolved to proceed, Mrs. Bishop?" My resolve, which had wavered slightly in the face of my son's anticipated fury, solidified again. I thought of the years of scrubbing, the smell of bleach that never quite left my hands, the word trash echoing in my ears. "Yes, Mr. Rourke," I said, my voice firm. "Proceed." The lawsuit, when it was officially served to Jerome at his office the following week, this time by a very stern-looking professional process server from Clayton Rourke's firm, an act designed for maximum impact within the hallowed halls of Rourke, Sterling and Finch, apparently caused an even greater explosion. This time Jerome called me. Not from his office line, but from his personal cell phone, his voice no longer cool and condescending, but a raw, furious roar. "What in God's name do you think you're doing, mother?" he screamed into the phone, so loud I had to hold the receiver away from my ear. "A lawsuit? You're suing your own son? Have you completely lost your mind?" "No, Jerome," I said calmly, though my heart was pounding. "I believe I have finally found it. After you so kindly pointed out how stupid and uneducated I decided to seek some very educated advice." "Rourke put you up to this," he accused, his voice laced with venom. "That snake. He's just using you to get at me. You're his pawn, you foolish old woman." "Mr. Rourke has been nothing but a gentleman, Jerome," I replied, my voice even. "He listened to my story, the one you didn't want to hear. He saw the receipts for your tuition, your rent, the clothes on your back, all paid for by my filthy jobs. He understood that a son who calls his mother trash, after she sacrificed everything for him, might indeed owe her something more than a $20 insult." "Sacrifice," he shrieked. "You call that sacrifice? You were my mother. It was your duty. You think you can just demand it all back now? With interest and damages? You'll be laughed out of court. I'll countersue you for harassment, for defamation, for being a terrible, grasping mother." His threats, once so terrifying, now sounded hollow, desperate. I had Clayton Rourke on my side. I had my meticulously kept records. And I had the truth. "You do what you feel you must, Jerome," I said quietly. "And I will do the same. Mr. Rourke will be handling all further communication." I hung up the phone, my hand trembling, but a strange sense of empowerment coursing through me. The battle lines were drawn. The news of the lawsuit. Esteemed young lawyer sued by his own mother, who cleaned toilets to fund his education, became a hushed then not so hushed scandal within Rourke, Sterling and Finch, and then inevitably, it began to seep into the wider legal community. Jerome, who had prided himself on his pristine image and his rapid ascent, suddenly found himself the subject of pitying glances and whispered gossip. His colleagues, the ones he had been so desperate to impress by demeaning me, now looked at him with a new, critical speculation. His important briefs were, I imagined, being overshadowed by the far more compelling brief detailing his own filial ingratitude. Clayton Rourke kept me informed. Jerome, through his lawyer, initially tried to have the case dismissed, claiming it was frivolous, an act of maternal spite. But Mr. Rourke presented my carefully documented financial contributions, my witness statements about Jerome's verbal abuse and neglect, and even hinted at the existence of other potential witnesses to Jerome's demeaning behavior. The judge, a stern-faced woman known for her no-nonsense approach, denied the motion to dismiss, stating there was indeed a case to answer regarding unjust enrichment and potential emotional distress. Jerome was being forced to confront the reality of his actions, not in the privacy of my small apartment where he could bully and dismiss me, but in the cold, impartial light of the law, with his own professional rival orchestrating his defense. My payback wasn't just about money, it was about accountability. It was about him finally understanding that the trash mother he had so cruelly cast aside had a voice, a truth, and now a very powerful ally. The scales of justice, so long tipped in his favor by my silent sacrifices, were finally, slowly beginning to balance. The denial of Jerome's motion to dismiss the lawsuit was a small victory, but Mr. Rourke had warned me it was just the first skirmish in what could be a protracted war. Jerome, backed by his aggressive litigator, seemed determined to fight me every step of the way, to drag my name, my sacrifices, and my character through the mud if it meant protecting his own carefully constructed image and, more importantly, his wallet. The irony of him accusing me of being a terrible, grasping mother, after he'd called me trash for asking for a small loan, was a bitter pill I swallowed daily. The discovery process was invasive and painful. Jerome's lawyer demanded access to my meager bank accounts, my employment records from decades of cleaning jobs, anything they could twist to suggest I was somehow financially irresponsible or that my claims of sacrifice were exaggerated. But Mr. Rourke was a shield, deflecting their more outrageous demands, his own team meticulously building our case with the evidence I had so painstakingly gathered. The faded receipts, the bank slips showing direct tuition payments, the small, heartfelt notes from Jerome during his college years thanking me for my endless support. Each piece of paper was a testament to my life's work, a life poured into him. The pressure on Jerome at Rourke, Sterling and Finch was clearly mounting. Mr. Rourke, with a subtlety that was almost Machiavellian, ensured that key partners at the firm were discreetly made aware of the full, unvarnished details of Jerome's conduct towards me. Not just the lawsuit, but the verbal abuse, the public humiliation, the profound ingratitude. A firm like Rourke, Sterling and Finch, built on a reputation of integrity and old money discretion, did not look kindly upon one of its ambitious young associates being publicly embroiled in a scandal involving the financial exploitation of his working-class mother. Jerome's star, once ascending so rapidly, was now visibly tarnished. His important briefs, I imagined, were indeed being overshadowed. The turning point came not in a dramatic courtroom showdown, but during a court-mandated mediation session. We sat across a polished mahogany table, Jerome, his lawyer, Mr. Rourke, and me. Jerome looked terrible. His expensive suit hung on him, his eyes were bloodshot and shadowed, and the arrogant sneer he'd worn so often was replaced by a sullen, resentful glower. He refused to meet my gaze. Mr. Rourke laid out our case with devastating precision, the clear trail of my financial contributions directly funding Jerome's entire education and early adult life, the stark contrast between my decades of menial labor and his current earning potential, a potential I had made possible, and his subsequent cruel repudiation and refusal of minimal support. He presented my journal entries detailing Jerome's insults, the $20 bill incident, and the emotional distress it had caused. He even hinted at potential witness testimony from people who had seen Jerome's dismissive behavior towards me. Jerome's lawyer blustered and postured, but the weight of the evidence, and perhaps the dawning realization of the catastrophic damage this was doing to Jerome's career, was undeniable. Mr. Rourke made it clear. We were prepared to go to trial to have me, Hazel Bishop, the toilet-scrubbing mother, testify in open court about how her lawyer's son had called her trash after she'd financed his entire life. The optics for Jerome and for his prestigious firm would be devastating. After hours of tense negotiation with Jerome mostly silent and his lawyer doing all the talking, a settlement was reached. It wasn't the millions some might fantasize about in such situations. My claim wasn't for a share of some vast fortune he hadn't yet made, but for restitution, for acknowledgement, for a measure of security for the years I had left, years he had clearly intended for me to live in penury and neglect. Jerome was forced to agree to a structured repayment plan, a significant monthly sum that would be automatically deducted from his salary for the next 10 years. It was, Mr. Rourke calculated, a fair approximation of the direct financial investment I had made in his law degree and living expenses during that time, with a modest consideration for the emotional distress. It wouldn't make me rich, but it would allow me to live with dignity, to afford my rent without constant fear, to finally see a doctor about my aching back and persistent cough without worrying about the bills. He also had to issue a formal written apology, vetted by both lawyers, acknowledging my sacrifices and retracting his cruel words. Though I knew any apology from him now would be hollow, a legal necessity rather than a heartfelt sentiment. The news of the settlement and its terms quickly made the rounds at Rourke, Sterling and Finch. Jerome Bishop, the arrogant young star, was now Jerome Bishop, the son who had to pay his mother back for calling her trash after she'd scrubbed toilets for him. His career, Mr. Rourke later told me with a certain grim satisfaction, was effectively stalled. He was no longer on the fast track to junior partner. He was a liability, a walking embarrassment to the firm's carefully cultivated image. Whether he would ever recover professionally was doubtful. For me, the payback was more than just the money, though that was a profound relief. It was the acknowledgement, however forced, of my worth, of my sacrifice. It was the knowledge that he could no longer dismiss me, no longer treat me as invisible refuse from his past. I had stood up to him not with screams or threats, but with the quiet power of truth and the unexpected alliance with a man he had underestimated as much as he had underestimated me. I continued my cleaning jobs, though not as many. The settlement allowed me to cut back, to finally give my aching body some rest. I started a small savings account, something just for me for a rainy day or perhaps for a small, quiet pleasure I hadn't allowed myself in decades. The $20 bill Jerome had flung at me? I framed it. It hung in my small kitchen, a daily reminder not of his contempt, but of my own strength, of the moment I decided I was worth more. I rarely heard from Jerome directly after that. The monthly payments arrived in my bank account, a silent, impersonal transaction. I knew I had lost my son, perhaps forever. The boy I had loved, the one whose future I had poured my life into, was gone, replaced by a bitter, resentful man who now saw me only as the architect of his professional humiliation. There was a deep, abiding sorrow in that knowledge, a wound that would likely never fully heal. But as I sat in my small, clean apartment, the scent of bleach finally less a part of my own skin and more just a tool of my trade, I felt a quiet dignity settle over me. I had scrubbed floors so he could walk in polished halls. He had called me trash. But in the end, it was his life that was now littered with the debris of his own arrogance and ingratitude. And I, Hazel Bishop, the woman who smelled of bleach and honest labor, could finally breathe. I had found my payback not in riches but in peace, in self-respect, and in the unshakable knowledge that I had, against all odds, reclaimed